Well, one thing that was scary for me is this is the anecdote that I give every time we're talking about like data sharing and really data theft or abuse rather, I guess would be a better way to put it. So me and my homies were hanging out one night, right? And we were literally trying to figure out what we're going to do for dinner. And it wasn't even his phone. My buddy goes, hey, Domino's is cheap. Fuck it. You want to get some Domino's? I'm like, I don't really know. Fuck it. I kind of lean back on the couch, grab my phone, start.
And then you see an ad on.
And then I see a fucking ad for Domino's on Facebook, and I'm like, Siri, you bitch. like that shit is terrifying. Or like when they first started coming out with I guess effective cookies, where you could you look up, like for me, like I collect fucking like comic book statues, right? Or comic book like major books, and I go to the website and I'm looking at stuff, and then I go onto like Instagram or Facebook and I see ads for the same thing I was just looking at.
Right.
It's like, fuck you. If I wanted it, I would have bought it.
Yeah, no, it's interesting on like the idea of it, because like everyone feels like personally attacked when they see like oh yeah, I was just researching about that and now there's ads coming up about it, or like yeah, I was just talking about that and now there's ads coming up about it. Like yeah, I mean it's kind of like uncomfortable.
I get why it's there. It's a very good tactic. Like I get why it's there. I think the reason why people feel attacked by it, or why people get uncomfortable, is they don't trust the source that it's coming from.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and the thing is that it comes back to like that having a huge corporation. Everyone's just a fucking number. Like no one actually really cares about what you're looking up. No one cares that you're just watching porn like 5 minutes ago, right? Like you can do whatever you want. Facts. And like that data is there, and yes, I'm sure they're using it to help like put ads in front of you so you can spend more money. But I mean, what does it come down to? Money, right?
No, facts.
And that's all they're just doing is like getting more and more money from you.
Well, see, what's scary is they don't trust the source of where it's coming from. They're not sure what parts of government are buying into their programs or buying into their companies. And so that's when it gets scary for a lot of people. It's like, okay, well, these big tech companies, they're stealing my data or they're abusing my data. Who in government are they giving it to? And what are they going to be using it for?
Okay, well, what are you doing that you're going to be concerned about that anyways?
See, exactly. So you have the people that are actually concerned about it, and you've got like the tinfoil hat.
And then you think like, okay, the FBI is like tracking and making sure everyone's staying on point, right? But like really just because like maybe you're like dealing drugs here, you're a small time drug dealer, even if you're making like maybe even $50K from dealing drugs, like the FBI isn't going to be on that.
Well, let me give you a great example. This guy, he's a podcaster. I forget the fucker's name, and I'd have it pulled up if I could, but they were just talking about it on Rogan's episode like 2 days ago. Mm-hmm. This dude wrote an article and put it on his Twitter, and it was basically a response to a meeting that AOC had with who the fuck did she meet with? She met with, it was a religious leader of some sort. And basically, apparently the interview she gave or had with this person, the responses she gave was like a fourth grader that didn't read the book and then went up to give the book report, right? Mm-hmm. It's very like blatant, very shallow, right? Beating around the bush. And all he said was AOC's responses were disappointing and unremarkable. 30 minutes later, or no, it's not 30 minutes later, 24 hours later, police show up to his door. Ununiformed, unmarked, in an unmarked car.
Yeah.
They show up to his door, and they're like, hey, man, stop talking shit about AOC on Twitter. Literally. Mm-hmm. Like, stop making threats. And he's like, I didn't. Fuck you. And they're like, yes, you did. We have records of it, all this. And he's like, they end up getting into it. And they show me the records. And then they looked at it like, yeah, I didn't do shit. Fuck off.
Right.
So that's what's scary.
Yeah.
Is when you start speaking out against popular interests, when you start speaking out against politicians. Like, that's what makes this country. That's what makes this country great. Is so when you start chipping away at that shit, that's when it gets problematic. Like, for instance, there's another story about these guys in a group chat. They were sharing memes, and then one of them got fucking busted, and they charged this dude with they charged a couple of them with conspiracy with intent because they were sharing fucked up memes about the government where they have no intention of doing it, but because they were sharing it within a group chat and the group chat got monitored by Facebook, they kicked down a couple of guys' doors and charged them. Like, that's a bit much.
Yeah, and so like there's a thing where people can abuse it, and like the government, it's possible. But the thing is like you hear these stories, right? But the government doesn't just like do stupid things, right?
I don't know about that.
So like when they make decisions like that, you hear like, oh yeah, they're just sharing a couple memes, right? The government's not gonna storm into a building because you share a couple memes.
So I understand what you're saying.
There's always more to the story that doesn't get released into the public.
This is also the same government that caused Ruby Ridge and Waco to happen. That's the problem. Is people like look at the track record of the government infringing rights on or infringing people's rights, and they're like, it could be me. That's the problem.
And so yes, so there is that side of the story, but you also have to think about how much like good the government's actually.
And there is a lot of good.
There's way more, and then there's these just outliers that like the public gets their hands off, misconstrued the story a little bit, and then blow it up, and everyone's like, oh my god, like our data's taken like just everywhere, and like we have no privacy and blah blah blah. It's because the media puts that out there, but the government's really doing like way more good with it than anything else. And then so like really, and we'll keep going with that. Yeah. What's really scary is when other people, that's not the government regulating it, when other people get a hold of this data and start doing other things,
like other countries. Right.
Well, so you heard about Cambridge Analytica, right?
It rings a bell.
So this was a company I think started back in 2010, maybe 2011, something like that. And they got shut down. They started out, I think, somewhere in Europe. And what they were doing was they were, you know, those tests that you take on Facebook. And it's like,
yes,
like, take this test and find this out about you.
What personality are you from the fucking Marvel movies or what Disney princess? Yeah.
And so. What they were doing was they were like having like a bunch of these tests. They had psychologists create these tests so that based off of the answers that you'd give, they can find out what kind of person you are. And they were using that information to display certain types of ads to you. Mm-hmm. And the ads that they were running at that time were, I can't remember, it was during a presidency. And they actually hired Cambridge Analytica to run their ads because they were running ads specifically towards who you were.
Right.
They were like finding out exactly who you were, what kind of mindset you had and everything. And so they would run ads tailored to that so that they can actually manipulate your mind.
Right.
And that's what actually they proved, that Cambridge Analytica alone had a sway in the presidential election because they were using the human psychology against everybody.
And that's what's scary.
That's what's scary. I would rather have the fucking like government like making sure that like shit like that isn't happening, and maybe there's a few outliers versus like having companies like that manipulate